pals, I'm here today to talk about all the books I've reserved at my local library. Some of these books I reserved back in November, and then we went into a stricter lockdown in England sort of late December time, and so I haven't managed to get any of these books. And then the other half of them I've requested in the last few days. Now, my limit on my library card I think is 12 books, and I've got 22 books on reservation, so I just have to really hope they don't all come in at once, although I think you can collect some and not the others. So this is going to be a bit of a juggling game whenever libraries do open again. I don't know when that will be. It may not even be in February. So I'll just be able to keep looking longingly at my reservation list and thinking about how exciting it's going to be when I can go and collect all these books. So firstly, we have a YA romance type book, which is Under a Dancing Star by Laura Wood. I have looked longingly at Laura Wood's books for the past couple of years because the covers are truly beautiful. And I'm not a massive fan of YA, in particular YA romance, but Laura Wood's books sound like the sort of books I could really enjoy because they're historical romance. So this is set in 1930s Cornwall, and I think it's about a sort of love affair this young girl has, which is maybe across different social classes. So I get vibes of I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, which I read years ago and really loved and need to reread. So I'm hoping that Laura Wood could be a contemporary author that I'll really enjoy. Then we have a couple of newish releases, and the first one is Sisters by Daisy Johnson. I've read all of Daisy Johnson's previous works. I think there's been 2, and I really like the sound of this one. I don't know much. It's about 2 sisters. I think maybe they're in a creepy house and weird shit goes down. Pretty much anything Daisy Johnson brings out I'm going to read, so very excited to get my hands on this one. And then we have After the Silence by Louise O'Neill, and I think this is focused around a body being found, and maybe there's some sort of true crime podcast element involved, and I think this focuses on domestic abuse. So I've heard really good things about this actually, and I can't wait to binge read this one. Then I have The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich. I have read The Roundhouse by this author, and that's the only book of hers I've read, and I've been fairly intimidated about which one to go to next because I know lots of her books are part of this really massive series, and I heard her newest one, The Night Watchman, isn't part of that series. I think this is a historical fiction book which is inspired by her grandfather's life, and I think it has something to do with him being involved in overthrowing some court case or some sort of law that affects the lives of Native Americans. So yeah, I've not had many people talk about this one, but I was super excited when I saw that my library had purchased a copy. Then we have, and I'm going to have to look because this is quite a long title, Entangled Life, How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds and Shape Our Futures by Merlin Sheldrake. I love this cover, I love this title, I love the author's name, all brilliant. And I saw Charlotte, I'm trying to remember what her new channel name is, Bookish Mama Blooms. I saw her review this book late last year and rave about it, and I'd already reserved it, but it made me even more excited to read this one. So as you can tell, this is a non-fiction book all about fungi, which sounds really intriguing. Then we have Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. I was actually browsing the shelves in my library and they had this one, and I stupidly didn't pick it up back in November time, and I think it was because I had too many books out at the time. And then next time I went in there I looked for it and it wasn't there because obviously someone had borrowed it. And so I have requested it and I've been waiting ever since. I've actually started listening to this one on audio, so I may try and cancel the reservation because there's no point in me like taking it off somebody if I've already listened to it. Although I do think I prefer reading YA and middle grade. I don't know, I don't love the delivery of like teen or child narrators on audio, so I may pause it. I don't know, what do you think? Have you read this one? Did you audiobook it or read it? This is a pretty brutal, difficult YA read, which opens with a young woman waking up in an apartment covered in blood. She's obviously like been attacked, and there is a body of a very famous singer who appears to be dead in the other room, and this is about inappropriate relationship between a very successful older male singer and a young sort of 16-17-year-old, and I think this is sort of loosely based on R. Kelly and the sort of things he did to young girls with his success and influence And then we have a book which is very unusual for me, and it is Mayflies by Andrew O'Hagan. I saw Hanna over at Let's Talk About Books Baby review this one. I'll try and find her video and link it above. And yeah, I just really like the sound of it. So I very rarely read books about men, to be honest. And this is about a group of men, but it follows their friendship. And I noticed that Hanna tends to read books that are more focused on women as well, and she really enjoyed this one, and I thought it sounded really beautiful. So it starts in the summer of 1986 in a small Scottish town, and it follows them throughout their lives as they become fathers, and I think something really sort of tragic happens that you follow and see how it affects their friendship through the years. So yeah, it sounds really beautiful. Then we have another non-fiction, and that is Wanderland, A Search for Magic in the Landscape by Jini Reddy. This one sounds delightful. I am always intrigued by books that focus on nature writing that are written by women, because a lot of nature writing is written by men, but also ones that combine sort of magic and folklore with a look at the natural world. And I looked at reviews of this one and I thought it sounded really good, so I can't wait for this one to come in as well. Then we have a cosy mystery. I really want to try and get more into cosy mysteries, and I actually, again, when I went to my library, I can't even remember when it was, but when it was still open, I browsed through all the books to try and find some cosy mysteries and couldn't find any. And then I went and had a look online and found they do have a few that people have raved about. One of them being The Anatomist's Wife by Anna Lee Hoover. This is the first book in the Lady Derby mysteries. It opens in Scotland in 1830. We follow Lady Derby. Her husband has just died. She's taking refuge at her sister's estate, and people find her a bit weird because she is the wife of an anatomist, and I think she did lots of his drawings for him. And then somebody's murdered, and somehow she's involved in like solving the crime to do with her like knowledge of bodies. And yeah, I've heard really good things about this one from people who read cosy mysteries, so I was glad to see that my library had a copy. Okay, so now we're on to the books that I requested in the last few days. All of those were requested like prior to Christmas, and so now you can like see what sort of things I've been interested in the last few days. I'm currently reading The Lost Queen by Sidney Pike, which is a historical fantasy romance set in, I think, 550 AD, and it's inspired by the woman who is thought to be the sister of the man who was Arthur. And so it's you know, around the time and the real people who inspired the legend of Merlin and Arthur and all that stuff. And I'm enjoying it, and it made me realise that I would really like to read lots more historical fiction books, whether they be fantasy or not, that are you know, based in medieval or early medieval times, because I tend to read stuff that's much more recent, 17, 18, 1900s, and yeah, I just really like reading stories set much longer ago. So I had a little look, and an author who kept coming up is Kereen Maitland. So I have put on hold The Plague Charmer. Let me know if you've read any of her books. This was the one that I thought sounded really interesting. This is set in 1361 in Exmoor. The reason I thought it sounded interesting is because this is set 13 years after the Great Pestilence, when a plague strikes England for the second time. We follow a woman who is trying to shield herself and her children from the plague, and then as her husband begins to die, she has to start asking like what she would be willing to do to save his life. So yeah, maybe a bit weird to want to read that book around now, but I thought it might have an interesting context and sort of be more powerful reading it in this moment. And yeah, all of her books sound pretty good, so let me know if you've read them. I think they might be slightly more like easy reads, like pacey and maybe slightly cosy, I don't know, but I thought that sounded good. And then we have the beautiful People from My Neighbourhood. This is written by Hiromi Kawakami and translated by Ted Goosen. I haven't read any of this author's books, and I actually really like the sound of all of them, and I think my library has all of them. This is the most recent publication that's been translated into English, and I think these are classed as I think they're called palm of the hand stories, so they're flash fiction. I don't usually love flash fiction, I really like short stories, but I sometimes struggle with like short stories. But I've heard lots of people whose reviews I trust really rave about this one, so I thought I'd give it a go, and if I enjoy the author's work I can get some of their other books out from the library. Okay, so the rest of these I requested last night, so they've been on my reservation list for less than 24 hours. So again, last time I went in the library, Johnny and I went to have a big browse at the children's section. I think in North America and other parts of the world you would class that as middle grade, so like the 9 to 12 age range, and that's because I just read and loved Hollypocks by Jessica Townsend, and I really felt like reading more sort of cosy, in particular fantastical children's books, and I was really disappointed in the selection. It felt like predominantly the books they had were focused on the younger range of that age range, so like 8 to 9 year olds. They had lots of really slim books in the same series and it was super white. I didn't feel like it was a very well curated selection at all, and I was really disappointed in it. And last night I thought, you know what, I am actually going to look what they have online, because the weird thing is in the area where I live in the I live in the only city in the county where I live, and we have the biggest library, so you would think the selection we have would be the best selection like in the area, but I'm aware that perhaps they don't have all the books out at the moment because where I live at least they've got rid of a lot of the shelves in order to spread the shelves out more. So I had a look, and actually they do have loads of books that I do really like the sound of, that are by authors of colour, but they just didn't have them out when I went there, so I've reserved them all, okay? Not all of them, because there's like a ridiculous amount that I'm interested in, but I reserved a few. The first one is The Girl and the Ghost by Hanna Alkaf, and get ready for some glorious covers. I think children's books have the most beautiful cover designs. So this is based on a Malaysian folktale, and we follow a young girl who is delighted when her witch grandmother gives her a pelicet, which is a ghostly companion, and they become quickly inseparable, but then Pink's shadow, the ghost, threatens to disappear, and so they have to go on some sort of adventure to save the shadow of the ghost, which sounds delightful. And this says it's for fans of Holly Black's Doll Bones. I haven't read that, I think that's one of her middle grade books, but I'm guessing that means this book has more of a sort of spooky edge to it. Then we have The Deep Blue Between by Ayesha, Harruna, Attah. Again, beautiful cover. This one's very bright and lovely. This is published by Pushkin. They publish really excellent children's books, so it's worth going to have a look at their website. This follows twin sisters as they flee their homes after a brutal raid, but this is actually the beginning of their story. So one of them goes to Brazil and one of them goes to the Gold Coast of West Africa, but they have shared dreams of water, and you follow them and like whether they will, I guess, manage to meet again. And I thought that sounded really lovely. The author is Ghanaian born, and so I'm, you know, like I said, trying to make sure I don't just read, like when I was a child, what I was bought and what I got from the library were, you know, very stereotypical fantasy books about white characters in sort of England or fantastical worlds that were very obviously based on like England as it was hundreds of years ago. So I'm very happy that I've managed to find out about these books. Then we have The Hungry Ghost by H.S. Norup. Again, this is published by Pushkin. I like the sound of all of this author's books, but I thought this one sounded particularly wonderful. And we follow a young girl as she arrives in Singapore during the month of the Hungry Ghost, when old spirits are said to roam the streets, and then one night a mysterious girl in a white dress appears. She follows this girl and then you follow their adventures through the dark of the city. Sounds delightful. And this next one isn't fantastical, I don't think, but it's still beautiful, and that's When Life Gives You Mangoes by Kereen Getten. I believe the author grew up in Jamaica and she now lives in Birmingham in England, and we follow a young girl through a summer when she makes a friendship she can't forget, and it says that a young girl arrives from England on the island, and they sort of roam the island together and discover secrets, and you follow as like you see how their friendship unfolds and what secrets are revealed, I guess. And then the next one is Fly Me Home by Polly Ho Yen. This has a touch of the magical, I believe. We follow a young girl who is feeling lost and alone in London, and she wants to be able to go back home to her dad who lives hundreds of miles away, and mysterious parcels start to arrive outside her flat, and it's whether they have some sort of magical power to them or whether there's a much more sort of mundane reasoning behind these packages. I thought all of this author's books sounded really good, but I found out that my library had this one, so I thought I'd give it a go. The next one is Red Leaves by Sita Brahmachari. All of this author's books sound excellent. I thought I'd start with this one. And again, this follows a child who is newly introduced to London. She's a refugee, and when she finds out that she's been found a new family and she has to leave the foster home she loves, she decides to run away. She meets a young boy who is from London. His parents are going through a divorce, so he wants to run away as well. And they meet in the heart of the ancient city woodland as they come into the orbit of Elder, a strange homeless woman who lives amongst the trees. And as helicopters hover overhead and newspapers filled with pictures of the two lost children, unexpected bonds are formed and lives are changed forever. I think that sounds really lovely. Can't wait to read it. And the next two I saw Jen mention on her channel. This one I think made two of her favourite books of the year in last year, and I'll link that video up here. And that is A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. And we follow a young autistic girl who starts the campaign for a memorial for the women who were put through witch trials in her small Scottish town, and the conflict that brings as she starts to challenge people and the strength she finds in doing that. I think this one sounds lovely. And this next one I saw Jen haul recently, and as soon as I saw the cover I was like, I don't care what it's about, I have to have it. And that is The Haunting of Aveline Jones by Phil Hickes. I mean, look at that cover, isn't it absolutely beautiful? I think this might be a slightly spooky middle grade book. She loves reading ghost stories, and then she discovers an old book, and it says, not only are the stories spine-tingling, but it once belonged to Primrose Penberthy, who vanished mysteriously, never to be seen again. And it says, something is stirring and it is looking for Aveline. Sounds great. I don't think I've read a spooky children's book, unless you count like Coraline and The Graveyard Book, since I was a child. When I was a child I used to read lots of horror. I was really into Goosebumps and then point horror as a teen. So I should really read more like children and YA horror now, because I used to love it when I was younger. And this next one, again, I saw on a channel recently in Favourite Books of the Year, and that is Harriet Rosie's channel, which I'll link above. I'll link her video where she spoke about her favourite books of the year. And one that she mentioned is The Extremely Inconvenient Adventures of Bronte Metalstone. I'm a sucker for like overly long children's book titles, and also children's books that have this sort of artwork on them, which I think is quite popular at the moment. I believe this is a series, and it's about a young girl called Bronte Metalstone. She finds out that her parents are killed by pirates, and she is then sent to stay with all of her aunts. She has lots of aunts, and her parents have left this like detailed plan that she has to do to travel to all of these aunts, and I think like do little mini quests when she's with each one. And the aunts are really like weird and wonderful, and it says loads of crazy stuff happens, and I thought the way Harriet described it made it sound like something I definitely wanted to read. And lastly we have two YA fantasy. I read quite a few YA fantasy last year, not loads but a few, and a couple of them I really enjoyed, and so I've now been trying to find like more YA fantasy in that vein. So one I heard loads of people haul and talk about is Raybearer by Jordan Ifweko. I believe she's a Nigerian author, and this is a West African inspired fantasy. It's about a young girl whose mother trains her to be a Raybearer, which is somebody who I think like swears themselves to protect the crown prince, but her mother is some sort of like sorceress or witch, and she has made her daughter promise to actually kill the crown prince once she gets close to him. And I'm assuming that once she does become a Raybearer, she becomes friends or maybe attracted to the prince and doesn't want to, and there's going to be a hell of a lot of conflict. So this one sounds intriguing. And then lastly, a book I have only just added because I saw Sabrina talk about it over on her channel. I will link the video above in the cards where she speaks about it, and I thought it sounded really good, and that is Tess of the Road by Rachel Hartman. Now I haven't read, I think she wrote the books, was it called Serafina? I haven't read those, so let me know if like you've read this author's books and you think I should read those first. But I thought this one sounded really good. This is set in a medieval kingdom where women are expected to be ladies, men are the protectors, and dragons get to be whomever they want. But we're following a young woman who decides, I don't want to follow that and I'm going to do whatever I want, and you follow her adventure from there. And I thought that sounded pretty interesting. So yeah, those are all the books I have on my reservation list. I tend to reserve a lot of books that I can read quite quickly, or books that I'm like not 100% sure are completely my thing. So sometimes I take more risks with like YA and stuff that I don't necessarily want to spend the money on because I could just completely dislike them. And also like middle grade I'm going to get through so quickly that I don't want to like purchase and pay for them all unless I really love them. So yeah, that is my list. Let me know if you've read any of these, what you thought of them if you have, and based on the books I've mentioned, if you have any recommendations that I can try and find at my library. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!